Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this video where I'm going to be painting up a Kroot Carnivore. Now, I found a whole bunch of the work could get done real quick if I base primed it in Death Guard green. I know the Kroot like to have really earthy tones for their skin and their armor and their cloth, and so I figure if I start off that way instead of with a black primer, half the battle's done, and it turns out that I was right. So I primed it with that really dark Death Guard green. And then the first thing I actually had to do it was to tone that down a bit, give it some definition in the recesses, so we get ourselves our Agrax Earthshade or some other kind of dark brown wash, and we give them a bath. So once that wash is dry, we can start highlighting the skin. Now, this was a commission job that I did, and the person who asked for the commission said make it like the box art. So I was following the template provided in the Warhammer painting app. So we're using Elysian Green for the first layer of highlight. And it wasn't too bad. The muscles and the definition on the Kroot are pretty well defined. They're very easy to see. So you just need to get yourself a nice tiny paintbrush. Make sure that the paint's nice and flowing, and take your time, and it'll come out looking really nice. Now you'll definitely want to go back and do a second layer. Maybe my paint was just overly thinned, but that Elysian Green was very, very thin, and the first layer underneath showed through quite a bit. So go back over, do a second coat, and as I've shown with previous videos, if you do the second coat not entirely covering the first, it'll give you a really nice blended look. So this is what it looks like after, I think, 2 coats in most places, maybe a third in some of the areas where I really wanted the color to stand out. So that previous step got us to a tabletop standard. In fact, I'd say it was a good enough standard. But if you want to add just a little bit more detail to it, get a slightly higher or a lighter green like Ogren Camo here, and highlight the sharpest edges, like the eyebrows, the cheekbones, knuckles, the kneecaps, maybe parts of the muscle where the muscle's really, really accentuated, but that just gives it a little bit more of that pop. Okay, with the skin all finished, it's time to move on to the next most noticeable part of the model, and that's his weapon. And fortunately for the Kroot, these weapons are very, very simple. There's 2 basic colors. You got the wood stock, you've got the metal barrel. So pick your favorite metal, a lighter, a darker, totally up to you. Give the entire barrel a good going over here. While we're waiting for that metal to dry, because we're going to put a wash on it, you do not want to put a wash on wet metal. But while we're waiting for it to dry, we'll paint the shoulder pad. Now this is the one place where you could really add some color to it if you wanted. Whatever color is going to be the base, for example, of your Tau Fire Warrior armor, this is the color you'd put here. Now the person who is having me paint this, they wanted it like the box, and the box was black. So I'm using a Corvus black because I don't want it solid black, I want it like a gray black. And 1 or 2 coats and it's done. Now when we go back to the gun here, because now finally the metal's dry, get whatever wash you want. In this case, I wanted to use Nuln Oil. You could use Earthshade or a brown to give it kind of a rusty, dirty look, but since the whole model already has an Earthshade wash, I was worried if I did an Earthshade wash on the gun too, everything would just blend together. So instead, I used a Nuln Oil wash for the metal, and then I'm going to go back after and highlight the raised edges so that the metal really stands out from the rest of the model. Okay, again, waiting for that wash to dry, let's tackle the third thing that's really going to stick out with a Kroot Carnivore, and that's his hair, I guess you call that, the little spines or quills that are sticking out the back of his head. I would recommend whatever color you do the skin, do something contrasting. So if you have light skin, do dark hair. If you have dark skin, do light hair. And the trick is you want it to blend and fit with the model, but you don't want the whole model to just be various shades of brown and green. So it's a little tricky here. What I decided to do for this one, to try and match the box art, was use a reddish brown as the base coat, and then we're going to highlight the quills to make them stand out a little bit. Now this was my least favorite part of the entire model, but you have to do it, otherwise it's just really noticeable. There's little quills sticking out all over his arms and his legs. So you want to make sure you get those, because if you don't, it's really noticeable and it doesn't look very good. So get yourself a tiny brush, make sure the paint's nice and thin, and just be patient as you scan around the whole model, looking for wherever those tiny quills are sticking out. Okay, with the hair and the quills done, we're going to go back and highlight just one layer of highlight on the gun itself. Get yourself a brighter silver. You could go all the way up to like Runefang Steel or Stormhost Silver or whatever the heck it's called now. But I just use Ironbreaker because it's bright enough. The goal is to create contrast, not to give you snow blindness. Now, I'm just going to do a zenithal kind of layer highlighting here. So the blade on that inner part of the blade to show that it's a lot sharper. And then on the top of the gun, I'm just going to do across the very top, and that's it. The rest of the gun, I want to leave it darker. You could paint over the whole thing and give the gun an entirely bright kind of look to it, but that might take a little too much attention away from the model, and it might make it look a little bit cartoony. So now it's time to accent and highlight the quills on the back of the head and on the rest of the body. So use a khaki, a light brown. I'd stay away from green because you've got the skin, but something with a slight yellow that can kind of blend between the brown of the hair and the green of the skin. For each of the quills, you'd probably want to paint about half of it. Right, from the middle of the quill to the tip, and that'll be about enough to show your first highlight. If you want to, you could go back then and do another highlight with a lighter yellow, painting the last quarter, and it will give you a really nice transition from the brown to the lighter yellow to then the brightest highlight at the end. And after you're done with the hair, don't forget to get all those little quills all over the body. For these, you can get away with just this first layer of highlight. Those quills are so small, if you start doing 2 and 3 highlights, nobody's going to notice unless they're looking super close. So we've got, I think, the 3 biggest parts of it, and it's looking pretty good. Yeah, there's still the cloth and the gun butt, but everything else looks pretty decent so far, at least I think. So let's get to those last couple bits of detail to finish this guy off. We'll start off with the gun butt. Get yourself a bright brown. If you paint too dark a brown, it'll match the quills and then it'll blend in. It's very tricky to paint with all these earth tones and not make the whole thing look like one single color. So get yourself a brighter brown so that the gun stock sticks out from the rest of the model. When it comes to painting the cloth or the clothing that he's wearing, this is one place where you could paint it a bright color to again match the crisis suits and the armor of the rest of the Tau army. In this case though, I wanted to stick with leather because that's what the box art was and that's what was requested. But I didn't want to use the same brown as the hair. So the hair I used Rhinox hide. For the cloth here I used Dryad bark. And Dryad bark, we're going to use that as a base coat actually to give it a highlight of a more reddy brown to make it stand out from both the gun stock and the hair. Now for highlighting the Dryad bark, you could go with like a Gothor brown or like a light tan or something. Instead, I wanted to go with a really muddy kind of a red. Again, just to try and break up the colors a little bit, add it where I could with all these earth tones. And I don't paint over the whole thing. Instead, I paint over most of it, but I leave the recessed areas as just the Dryad bark. And when it dries, the two blend together really, really well. And you'll get this look of a very reddish, muddy, rusty kind of leather with these natural dark shadow areas. I think it's coming along pretty nicely. There's only a few subtle details you could add here. There's a few details we need to get, but for the most part, we're just about finished. Now, one of the first details I'm going to add that you don't necessarily have to, but it adds some character to it, is to highlight that shoulder pad. So since I did a kind of grayish black, get yourself a bluish gray and do an outline of the edges of the shoulder pad, and it'll give it a little bit more definition. So the next item that you really have to do, because we haven't done it yet, is there's some golden jewelry around the model that we want to make sure we paint. So there's like a necklace or a choker or something, or some kind of medallion hanging around his neck. There's also a little trinket hanging from the front of his gun. So turn the model around a bit. Some of them have little bands around their forearms, like a torque or something like that. You want to make sure you get all those. But this is something you don't want to miss or forget, because it'll stick out like a sore thumb if you do. So let's give him a bit of a 360 here. Take a look and see what we've got done. See what's left. You can see the gold highlights stick out nice, but they don't overwhelm. Just about everything is finished except for a few minor details. So one of which is we're going to add a tiny bit of highlight to the gun stock, just to give it a little more definition. You could probably use a slightly brighter color than I'm using here, but since the whole model is very, very subdued, I didn't want anything to stick out too much. Now here's the funny part of the video where I show you why I call the whole channel Good Enough. This was supposed to be my, look, we're all finished, isn't he beautiful? And we do the slow turn and everything's all done. And then I noticed I totally forgot to paint his chest. He has that part of his chest that's supposed to be a different color. So we'll get to that part right now. I grabbed one of the khaki colors I haven't used yet, Xandri Dust, and just gave each of those little, I don't know if they're muscles or whatever, on the front of his chest a couple light coats just so that they stand out a bit. And I realized as I was painting this, I was basically making him a Ninja Turtle. So I don't know if that was GW's intention when they came up with the scheme, but as I'm painting this, I realized I'm basically painting a Ninja Turtle. So you could use any color you want. You could use like a cream color to give it a slightly lighter belly. You could use a brown. Any kind of neutral earth tone will work. But once that's dried, you're finished. And I think either way, with or without it, it looks good enough.